Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is one of America's and the world's foremost thought leaders and educators. Many of you have known her story, and this morning we get an opportunity to really take a deeper dive into her life and the lives of others that she has affected. Her name is Esther Wojcicki. She has written an incredible book entitled How to Raise Successful People: Simple Lessons for Radical Results. Miss Esther, good morning and welcome to the OPT Network.
Good morning. Thank you so much for including me. I'm really excited to be here.
We're excited to have you, and more than that, we're honored to have you. We know that you are speaking around the world, sharing a message that every parent is trying to understand and really duplicate in many ways. But I want to start in the book where you talk about the pain of growing up. And you write, your brother Lee is a boy. He said plainly, talking about your dad, and in our family, boys are more important. He delivered this news as if he had no understanding of how it might affect me. And so in order to really understand why you have had such great success with not only raising your daughters, but helping to catapult so many other young people into greatness, it's really important that we understand your upbringing. So tell me about that moment when you understood that you were not really as important as your brothers.
Well, I was just a child at that time. And I remember when my dad said this, and I was about 5 years old. And I remember thinking, oh, that's really funny. I'm not sure I believe it. And, because I had been the only child before that. And all of a sudden, I was no longer important. And not only that, they weren't going to prioritize any of my needs. So it didn't really make sense to me. But as time went on, as my brother got bigger, then I began to see what they really meant. And what they really meant is that his needs were prioritized. And as a child, it wasn't terrible because, so he got, the toys he wanted, or he got to do the things that he wanted. He got it much more, he was pampered in a lot of ways. But when it really hit home, when my father, who believed in this philosophy of spare the rod, spoil the child, would, hit me or spank me for things that that he considered that I wasn't doing appropriately. I was responsible for a lot of the things around the house. And that was because, we grew up in poverty pretty much. And so I was responsible for doing things like the laundry and cleaning up and things like that. And if I didn't do things that I was supposed to do, or if I somehow, talked back in a way that he considered inappropriate, he did not think it was inappropriate for him to hit me. He stopped doing that when I got to be taller than him. So when I was 13 years old, I was 5'9".
Wow.
And my father was 5'7". And at that point, it became clear that that was not an appropriate way to interact with his daughter. And I don't know how I got to be so tall. I'm actually 5'10". I grew another inch. And because my father was 5'7", as I mentioned, my mom was 5'2". And so the question was like, how did she get to be so tall?
Mm-hmm.
I think the answer was really because they talked about it. They both came from Russia, and they grew up in environments where there was not enough food. And so here I was in America where, okay, we were poor, but we still had enough food. I could still eat. And so they always said, oh, it's because of all the food. She gets to eat whatever she, wants to eat, and as much as she wants to eat.
Mm-hmm.
I was always super thin. It was probably because all the energy went to making me tall. But that was, it was an uncomfortable situation in many ways for me with my dad. And then it got worse when I decided that I wanted to go to college. And girls in, Orthodox Jewish homes don't go to college. You become a mother at 18.
So tell me what it was about your life that you understood from your mother and just from living that girls didn't go to college. What was it that was within you that said, I'm not going to follow that same tradition?
Well, it was, unfortunately, if you read the book, you see that there was a tragedy that happened when I was 10 with my youngest brother.
Right.
And he died as a result of my mother listening to the doctor who gave her faulty information. And she never questioned it. She just followed those instructions. And the instructions were, after he had ingested aspirin by accident, that the instructions were put him to bed and see how he is in a few hours. That's not, you never do that with somebody that has ingested a poison. But why she didn't think through that herself, and I'm sure she knew it, it's because she was so afraid to contradict authority. She was so afraid not to follow what somebody with a long title said. So she followed his advice, and with tragic consequences because he died.
Right.
And so what that said to me as a child, and it was not on the conscious level, it was all subconscious, but it said to me, you need to be able to understand things in the world yourself and to protect yourself. You need to be able to you have to be educated. You need to know when people are saying things that don't make sense. And so after that, I was just passionate. I mean, almost ferociously passionate about, I had to know about a lot of things. And I remember that I was not a fan of reading a lot of fiction books. I was always reading a lot of nonfiction. And then it was like, why is that? Why am I always, and it was always because nonfiction teaches you about the world. And it teaches you, to make decisions about the world that you're living in. So, I mean, of course, I read fiction too. I had some really favorite authors like Pearl Buck, who I don't think anybody reads these days, but, she was a great author writing about China.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite spot after that was just the library. And why the library? Because the books were free.
Mm-hmm.
And, I could take out as many as I wanted. And so that made me want to, protect myself. I not only wanted to, I saw that almost as a life and death situation. I needed to know this information because if I didn't know it, I might make a mistake, even if somebody who was intelligent and an authority in some case said something that didn't make sense. And it was, I'm telling you, all on the subconscious level.
Wow. And so you write about that incident in the book, and you say that the family never really, especially your mother, never really recovers from that tragedy.
Never recovered. Never. I mean, I think a mother never recovers from the loss of a child. You might get better, but it's always there. And yeah, my poor mother, it was really a tragedy. And I feel sad for all these mothers that lose their children, no matter what age,
Right.
what circumstance. It's a tough situation.
Sure. Let's take a break here. But when we come back, I want to talk about understanding that you were going to create an intention for your life and the life of any future children that you would have that would be different from the life that you grew up in. Stay on point. We're back with more of this conversation right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is an incredible educator, journalist, writer, and is really blazing a trail around the world, helping us understand how to raise kids that will go out into the world and be able to work and walk in their gifting. The book is entitled How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. And I was asking you, Esther, I said, out of all of the great tips in the book, I was saying this to you during the break, if you can't heal the wounds from your childhood, you're really at a handicap with sending kids forth into the world to do what it is that they're called to do. And there was so much intention on your part to heal yourself. And I wondered, out of all of the things that happened as a child and you always being tamped down, knowing, being verbalized, you are not as good as your brother. But your mother, you write that she had a kindness about her that you loved. But when do you begin to heal from all of the things that maybe people thought maybe you wouldn't remember, or maybe they just thought that's the way that it was? When do you start to heal yourself so that you can be a different mother, a different parent?
So it didn't happen when I was a child. It took a little bit more living and more experience. But when I was already in my 20s, I realized that my father was a product of his environment and that he had grown up in a very difficult set of circumstances as well. And he was treated the way he was treating me. And so when I actually forgave him emotionally for what he did, I forgave him for the way that he treated my mother, the way he behaved after my brother was born and then he died. I forgave him for everything. And in forgiving him, that took a burden off of me. I realized that I was carrying around this anger that was really burning me and that was coloring my behavior and my actions. So I never wanted to be like him. I never wanted anybody. I actually never really left him alone with my children.
And how do you then not marry that same kind of man? Because subconsciously, that's generally what happens.
Well, I did. My husband was very similar in some ways to my father because he came from Poland, and in Poland, the man rules. And so and the woman has no say in anything. So I definitely, I thought he was different because, first of all, he was Catholic, right? So I rebelled and married somebody that was completely out of the Jewish religion. And then I thought that, he's got a PhD, he's really smart, but culturally, he was really very similar. And I can say to his credit, he changed, but it took time. It wasn't immediate because, he also was a product of his environment. And, he was brought up to be like the chief honcho. And that was the way it was. And, he's very, 50-50. He shares everything. But it didn't start out that way. Mm-hmm. And it was more of a gradual change and a gradual realization that things had to change. But, as I mentioned, when I got married, he was in charge and I had already lost my name. I was now Mrs. Stanley Wojcicki. And whenever I signed anything, that was the way I was supposed to sign it. I didn't get a credit card. I couldn't have a credit card. We bought a house, it was just in his name. They didn't allow houses to be in both names. Well, at least, in the Palo Alto area that I was in.
So are you able to tell him at that point, are you able to articulate to him the hurt that you had come out of from your family, and then you guys start to work on the relationship itself so that it doesn't spill over into your children?
Well, I was able to articulate a lot of the problems. He saw them. He could see what was going on. And, it's interesting. He saw them, and then he did not think that he was anything like that. It took time for him to realize that some of the things he was doing were very similar. A lot of the men, they were trained to be like their dads, and it's subconscious. So it's very hard for men to change the way that they are as adults because, they're copying the model, and the model was very, the way it was for centuries. Men are in charge. And that's why I think today it's very difficult. A lot of men, they favor the Me Too movement and favor a lot of what's going on, but then it's hard for them to change because their mindset is, oh, this is the way I remember it, and this is,
Right.
I'm in charge, and you're gonna. My mom always did what my dad said. She moved wherever he said, whatever he said, she did. That was just the way it was.
And so when you now start to have your own voice in your own marriage, how does your husband receive that?
Well, initially he was not so thrilled with this idea, and it was a gradual shift from the time where he was totally in charge. I think he became very involved in his work, and you'll see that in the book that he didn't have a lot of time because being a professor at Stanford, it's 150% job. And so you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of other things. And I think in some sense that worked, in my favor because he was so busy. He's like, oh, well, you take care of all these things. And that worked out for me. It'd be interesting to know how it would be
if he would have been there more
all the time. Yeah, I think things would have been different.
And there were times in the book that you write, you felt almost as if you were a single parent. And so it did work out because he sort of had some of the same ideologies in terms of raising children that your dad had.
Right. That's correct. But he wasn't there.
But he wasn't there.
And, but he was there. I shouldn't say he wasn't ever there, of course. He was there on the weekends. He actually was he coached their soccer teams. The kids were on swim teams. He went to the swim meets. He did as much as he could, considering the constraints of his job.
Sure. And there's no condemnation on him or any other man because, quite frankly, that was a time where women were more of the caretakers of the family and the men were the providers. And that's just sort of the era.
It was, when I became a journalist, I wrote for a local newspaper, and I was allowed to do a lot of different things because it was a tiny little weekly newspaper. But then later on, when I wanted to write for the San Francisco Chronicle, the only section they wanted me to write for was called the women's section. There were 4 sections of the paper, and the women's section was the one where you talked about child rearing, how to take care of your husband, how to clean the house. I'm not kidding. It was all in one section. Dear Abby was in that section. That's what women did. Women were home taking care of the house.
Absolutely. Let me get a break here. When we come back, we'll talk more about the acronym TRICK and how that works to help build successful children that become adults that launch into the world. Stay on point. We're back with that right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Esther Wojcicki. Her book is How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. And Esther, the reason why I wanted to take so much time into your childhood and into the growth process is because I think that the tools that you lay out in the book are really incredibly important tools. But until you really do the work, the first work of healing oneself, none of that's really going to garner a whole lot because it'll be up and down because you still don't understand a lot of the why behind the what or the what behind the why, And so one of the things that you have written about and been asked to speak about around the world is the acronym TRICK. Tell me when that was birthed for you.
It was birthed actually when people were asking me, what did you do with your daughters? And I actually had to think about it because I didn't know for sure exactly what I had done. And then that happened also in conjunction with people wanted to know why my programs at school were so popular. Why did so many kids want to take those programs? And one of the things I did was I asked my students, and it sounds crazy for a teacher to do this, but I said, why'd you take this class? Why aren't you taking another class? You have a lot of options. Why this class? And one of the things they said, well, you trust us. And when they said that, it didn't ring a bell. I didn't understand what they were saying. It took a few years of students saying the same thing for me to realize that I was indeed trusting them and that this played a huge role in how they felt about themselves.
Wow.
And so then, as I was writing the book or thinking about writing the book and invited to, I was trying to think about what other components had I used to make a difference in the lives of all these students and to make a difference in the lives of my children. And then I realized trust went along with respect. Because when you trust somebody, you respect their ideas, you are willing to talk to them, listen to their thoughts. And so the last three parts of the acronym, independence, you give them independence. You respect them, give them independence. You collaborate instead of dictate. Instead of telling them what to do all the time, it's a collaboration. And when they make mistakes, it's okay. You treat them with kindness. And that goes in the school and goes in the home and it goes in the workplace. People are afraid to take a risk. They're afraid to be themselves because they're afraid of how they're going to be condemned and they're not going to be treated with kindness. And so they don't take a risk. And we wonder, why isn't there innovation? Where's the innovation? Where is creativity? Well, you can't be creative if you aren't willing to take a risk. And so that's how it all came together.
And one of the things that you talk about and you write about in the book is the pressure that parents are putting on children. Why is that such a critical piece?
So there's this incredible pressure for your kids to do what is considered the safe thing and the right thing. And that's because parents think there is a very narrow path to success. And if you somehow fall off that path to success, you're not going to be successful. You're going to end up, with problems. But in fact, by controlling the kids to that degree, you are removing what is the most important thing of all, which is the child's belief in themselves. They have to believe and trust their own instincts and trust their own ideas to be able to achieve creativity and be innovative and do things that they care about. And all it takes is for one person, one mentor, one person the child respects to believe in them, for that child to really blossom. And many children, I'm sorry to say, don't even have one person. And it's because those people, the people closest to them, think that it's so important to follow this exact path. And they'll say, well, I tried it, and it didn't work for me, so I don't want you to do it. And you have to remember that there's a lot of ways to solve a problem. The only problems that don't usually have multiple solutions are math problems. But otherwise, there's a lot of different ways to solve a problem and to think about the world. And if we don't think about how to save our planet now in new and creative ways, we're going to have a real problem. Because while there's a whole group of people that want to move to the moon or to Mars, I'm not among those group.
I'm not either.
I don't want to move. I kind of like it here on Earth.
Absolutely. And so have you been overwhelmed at how you have been so sought after to talk about how to raise up this next generation with this acronym that you used just because of establishing a better way for your children?
Well, I must say it has been a bit overwhelming to have so many people that want me to speak or to podcast or to, travel to different parts of the world. I'm honored and I'm, of course, passionate about it. So I have been doing a lot of traveling. And so, for example, next week I'm going to France. And then the week after that, I'm actually going to be going to Singapore. And then I'm going to Austria. I'm going to lots of different places. And it's not, I like to travel, but you don't really travel when you go on these trips because, you go there and then you're busy doing all the talks, meeting people, and then you have to leave. So it's not exactly a vacation, but I'm passionate because a lot of people have questions and I would like to help them.
And so what people are trying to do is they're trying to take this paradigm that you have created not only for your children, but for the children that you have been privileged and gifted to launch into this world. And people want to see how they can replicate that. What do you
Right.
say to them about doing the same thing that you did, about their possibilities?
Well, one thing that the parent needs to do is to step back and stop being so controlling. And they need to start first thinking about how they can trust their child. And changing habits is really hard. So if they could just change little things at a time, just little bits at a time, that'll be helpful. And they also have to start thinking about how they can forgive themselves and trust themselves, believe in themselves. And, I'm sure everybody does things that they wish they hadn't done. So if they could just, forgive yourself, forgive the people around you that did things that perhaps they didn't even know they were doing that hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
Because that takes up a lot of your energy and a lot of your time. And so that'll free you up to do things that you actually want to do and care about and work with your child or work with your partner or whoever else is important in your life. I think anger, we see the anger happening all the time in all different parts of the world where people who are closely related, in the Middle East or all over the world who are doing terrible things to each other for hurts that happened centuries ago.
Absolutely.
Can we forgive each other?
Forgive each other. What a great way to end this segment. Miss Esther, we want to thank you so much for giving us so much of your time to talk about a subject that we can all do better in. It is an incredibly important teaching tool, this book is. Thank you so much. Once again, the book is entitled How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. Before you got to go, give people your website and how they can connect with you.
So they can connect with me on Twitter. It's Esther Wojcicki at Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I do have a website that is raisesuccessfulpeople.com, and you can sign up for a newsletter that I'm going to get ready to publish. So I would be delighted to hear from people.
Absolutely. Esther, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And you had fantastic questions.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This is my final point on point today. We want to thank Esther Wojcicki for taking time out of her globally busy schedule. She is traveling literally around the world, speaking to students, speaking to audiences, and really helping us understand what she has written in the book, How to Raise Successful People. She calls them simple lessons for radical results. And I couldn't help but to look back on the beginning of her life and how it started out and how underrepresented and how almost unseen she was in her family. Oftentimes, when we are raised in a situation where there is pain, the cycle repeats itself and there's more pain. And if you're not careful, it's hard to break the cycle. But what Esther decided very early on in her life is that she didn't want to repeat the same things that she had seen growing up in her life. And she knew one thing more than anything is that she wanted to be an independent thinker. She wanted to be able to learn. She wanted to have enough information so that she wouldn't make the same mistakes and have the same challenges that her mother had. And when she became a mom, she was determined to do things differently. And I asked her as we were talking, I said, how did you make that psychic change? How did this happen for you that you didn't repeat the same things that you saw? And she started thinking about it. And she said, when I was asked to write this book, I went back and I went into my memory and my life, and I started to just think about how I did things differently. And she said one of the things that she wanted to do more than anything was to be able to trust her children and to give them enough space to explore, to find out solutions to their own situations and not really give them everything. And I think that for my generation, for sure, if you grew up in a certain way and you felt like you didn't have the things that you wished you would have had, then you start to compensate with your children and overcompensate. And now that I'm in the second half of my life raising children again, I am so cognizant about the lessons that we are teaching and about helping them to figure out their own solutions. You see, in this culture, we've given our kids everything and we've crippled them. And then when they become adults, what we're now calling adult children who are not able to be self-sustaining, we look at them and we say, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you get a job? Why can't you launch from the nest into the world, into independence? Well, we need not look any further than ourselves. Have we crippled our children so early on and so often that they don't understand self-sufficiency? And so Esther came up with an acronym to really sort of describe her way of parenting and teaching. And it's called TRICK. Trust, being able to trust. Trust yourself. Trust your decisions. But teaching our kids to trust and how not to be so afraid of everything. I can remember when we were raising our son, and I would say to him, if he would start to talk to a stranger or a stranger would talk to him, and I'd look over at him and I'd give him the eye and I would say, who is that? And he would retort, a stranger. And I would say, we don't talk to strangers. Absolutely wrong answer. I was so afraid that he would be taken up or somehow something would happen to him because he was talking to a stranger that I created a young person who didn't want to interact with people. And so we have to be willing to trust. Trust the process. Trust our kids to sort of be able to make some of their own decisions. I'm not saying that we don't have to watch over, but we have to instill in them the ability to trust themselves and their instincts and their intuition. And then the next thing is respect. One of the most fundamental cornerstones that there is, respect. When we teach our kids to respect themselves, to respect us as parents, and to respect authority, then that takes them a really, really long way in life. And then she says we have to allow them to be independent. We have to cultivate independence. We can't do everything for them because if they live and we live, they're going to grow up and they're going to become adults that need to understand independence. And that's what I is for. The K is for kindness. Right now, what I realize is that we're living in a world where people have forgotten kindness. I think every one of us. Really, we don't forget kindness when people are maybe kind to us. But can we be kind to people who are not kind to us? Can we be kind to the people who live in our house? To me, kindness is like love. It starts at home and then it spreads abroad. And so that is the acronym. And I left out C, collaboration. And it means working together. And it all starts in the family unit. I believe that when you can start at home, then it will spread. But these are lessons that Esther really stands on. And these are the things that she taught not only her children, but all of the children that she has taught as a teacher along the years. Some of the most famous and successful people in the world, Steve Jobs. The list goes on and on and on of the people that she was able to touch and trust and teach. And so she's written it in this book, and it just gives you a lot of real good ideas about how you can begin to change what you did. And what I found as a parent is that we're all a product of what we come from. You only know what you learned growing up. And then when you grow up and you become an adult and you have your own family, you really should be able to look back on your life and your upbringing and dissect it. And I think that that's what most people don't want to do. We don't want to look at what our parents didn't do right. Because if we look at what they didn't do right, maybe we're speaking something that is not good and wholesome about our parents. But the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, as a mom and as a parent, we all bring to the table what we know. We do the best that we can. But one of the newisms, and our uncle knew, Stephen Sweezy, would always say to us, you have to update. What happened and what worked 20 years ago may not work today. And you've got to find what will work to make it better. And so as we now have a 20-year-old and a 3 and a 4-year-old, some of the things that we did with the 20-year-old, we don't want to do with 3 and 4-year-olds. We want to allow them to be more independent. We want to trust them to trust their instincts as we sort of guide and coach that. We want to teach more kindness. We want to incorporate more kindness at home. And we want to collaborate. We want to show our young people how to work together so that they can learn to work with others. Are we going to all have successful kids like what Esther and her husband have? Maybe yes and maybe no. But when we start to cultivate the gifts and the talents that lie within, then we give them room and we teach them to go out and soar and to do what it is that they're gifted to do. But it takes work. It takes really being in tune with your kids so that you can figure out what they're good at, so that you can, offer them things that you didn't have, things that your parents didn't have. We can take a different path. We can help them to find their own path. And we don't have to get stuck in this mold that this is the way my folks did it, and this is the way I'm going to do it. If it was good enough for me, it was going to be good enough for mine. No, you've got to be an innovator. And you've got to look at each child differently and find out what works for them. It is an incredible book. I hope that you'll pick it up and take a look at it. I know it's certainly blessing me and my family, and I believe that it will for you and yours as well. That's my final point, on point today. Stay with us, everybody. We're back to wrap up right after this.